The bullet whistled past Dr. Elena Vasquez's ear so close she felt the heat of its passage against her skin. 27 years of treating gunshot wounds in emergency rooms had never prepared her for the visceral terror of being the target. Her hands, steady as granite during 12-hour surgeries, trembled as she pressed herself against the concrete wall of the bombed-out clinic in Kandahar. "Doc, we need to move!" Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen's voice cut through the chaos of automatic weapons fire and screaming civilians. Blood streamed from a gash above his left eye, but his rifle remained trained on the doorway where Taliban fighters had been moments before. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Elena's breath came in sharp bursts, fogging in the frigid Afghan morning air. At 48, she was the oldest person in this Special Forces A-team by nearly 2 decades, and right now, she felt every single one of those years in her aching joints. The 70-pound pack on her back, medical supplies that could save dozens of lives, felt like it weighed twice that amount. "I said we need to move, Doc." Chen grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not rough. Even in combat, the team treated her with a respect that had taken months to earn. Through the shattered window, Elena could see the village children they'd been treating for malnutrition huddled behind overturned tables. Their wide, terrified eyes reminded her of her own daughter's face 25 years ago, back when nightmares were the worst thing Elena had to worry about. Back when the biggest challenge in her life was getting through medical school as a single mother, not surviving firefights in one of the world's most dangerous countries. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, she'd been Dr. Elena Vasquez, respected trauma surgeon at San Francisco General Hospital, living in a comfortable Pacific Heights townhouse with her golden retriever and her collection of rare orchids. Her biggest concern had been whether to accept the department head position or take early retirement to write the medical textbook she'd been planning for years. Then Captain Sarah Mitchell had walked into her OR during a particularly brutal Saturday night shift, waiting patiently while Elena extracted shrapnel from a gang shooting victim's chest cavity. When Elena finally looked up, exhausted and blood-spattered, Sarah had asked a question that changed everything. "Doctor, have you ever considered what it would be like to save lives on a battlefield instead of cleaning up after one?" Now, crouched behind crumbling concrete while insurgents tried to kill her, Elena wondered if she'd lost her mind accepting Sarah's challenge. The Army recruiter had been brutally honest about the odds. Women over 40 attempting Special Forces selection had a 98% failure rate. The physical demands alone eliminated most candidates decades younger than Elena. The psychological warfare of the training program broke even seasoned combat veterans. But there had been something in Sarah's eyes that night, a recognition Elena hadn't seen in years. Not the polite respect her colleagues showed her, or the professional deference of her medical residents. Sarah had looked at her and seen potential, raw, untapped capability that Elena herself had forgotten existed. "Movement, 2 o'clock. The voice belonged to their team leader, Captain Rodriguez, crackling through their comm system. "Doc, Chen, we've got civilians trapped in the school building. I need you to." The transmission cut off as another burst of gunfire erupted from the marketplace. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar calm that descended whenever lives hung in the balance. This was why she was here. Not for the glory or the challenge of earning a green beret at an age when most people were planning retirement. She was here because 27 years of emergency medicine had taught her that the difference between life and death often came down to having the right person in the right place at the right moment. And right now, those children needed her to be that person. Elena shouldered her medical pack, checked the sidearms Sarah had taught her to use with deadly accuracy, and looked Chen in the eye. "Let's go save some lives, Sergeant." The young soldier's grin was fierce and proud. "Yes, ma'am. I'll follow you anywhere, Doc." As they sprinted across the bullet-scarred courtyard toward the school building, Elena's mind flashed back to the moment everything changed. Not in this godforsaken village in Afghanistan, but in a sterile hospital corridor in San Francisco, where a Special Forces captain had dared her to discover who she really was. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I want to take a moment to thank you for watching. Creating and narrating these detailed, novel-length stories takes tremendous time and research to bring you the most engaging content possible. We're embarking on a journey of nearly 50,000 words together. That's a full novella. If you're already hooked by what you've heard, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this story with someone who would enjoy it, and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. This is going to be an epic adventure, so get comfortable, and let's continue with this remarkable tale. The fluorescent lights in OR7 cast their familiar harsh glow over Dr. Elena Vasquez's hands as she worked to repair the damage a .38 caliber bullet had done to a 19-year-old's liver. Blood pooled in the cavity despite her careful suction, and she could feel the familiar race against time that defined trauma surgery. 27 years of nights like this, and the adrenaline still kicked in the moment she made the first incision. "Pressure's dropping," announced Dr. James Liu, her anesthesiologist and one of the few people in the hospital who'd worked with her long enough to read her micro-expressions. "BP's 80/40 and falling." Elena's fingers moved with practiced precision, isolating the damaged vessels. The bullet had fragmented, sending metal shards through tissue that would take months to heal properly, if they could save the kid at all. Gang violence had been escalating in the Mission District, and San Francisco General was bearing the brunt of it. 3rd GSW this week, 2nd this night. "More suction," Elena commanded, her voice steady despite the exhaustion she felt in her bones. At 48, she was no longer the young resident who could work 36-hour shifts and bounce back with a cup of coffee. Her lower back ached constantly now, and her hands, though still surgeon steady, showed the first signs of arthritis that would eventually end her career. The OR doors swung open, and Elena glimpsed Captain Sarah Mitchell in her peripheral vision. The Army officer had been waiting in the family area for over an hour, which meant this wasn't a casual visit. Military personnel occasionally stopped by the trauma center to check on wounded soldiers who'd been transferred from overseas, but something about Mitchell's patient stillness suggested a different purpose. "Got it," Elena murmured as she successfully clamped the bleeding vessel. The teen's blood pressure immediately began to stabilize. "James, let's close him up. Good work, everyone." 40 minutes later, Elena emerged from the OR to find Captain Mitchell still waiting, now holding 2 cups of coffee from the vending machine that everyone knew produced liquid that barely qualified as beverage. "Dr. Vasquez, I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell, Special Forces Medical. Could I have a few minutes of your time?" Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, though she knew it would taste like burnt motor oil. "What can I do for you, Captain?" "If this is about the Henderson case from last month..." "It's not." Sarah's directness was refreshing after years of hospital administrators who spoke in euphemisms and committee speak. "I've been observing you work for several months. Your reputation precedes you. Best trauma surgeon on the West Coast, they say, but I'm more interested in your background." Elena raised an eyebrow. Her background was hardly classified information, but it wasn't typically the subject of military inquiry either. "My background? Born in El Paso, daughter of a Marine Corps veteran. Full scholarship to Stanford Medical School, which you completed while raising a daughter as a single mother. Top of your residency class at Johns Hopkins. 27 years of trauma surgery, including 2 years with Doctors Without Borders in Somalia and Afghanistan." The recitation of her life's accomplishments felt strange coming from this composed young officer. Elena studied Sarah's face, noting the small scar above her left eyebrow and the way she held herself, alert, ready, dangerous in a way that most people would never recognize. "You did your homework," Elena said carefully. "Mind telling me why?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time, Elena saw something beyond professional courtesy in her expression. "Because I think you're wasting your talents patching up gangbangers when you could be saving the lives of people who put theirs on the line for something bigger." "Excuse me?" Elena's voice carried the edge that made surgical residents tremble. She'd been propositioned, insulted, and patronized by countless people over the years, but this was a new approach. "Special Forces needs medical officers, Dr. Vasquez. Not fresh-faced kids straight out of medical school who fold under pressure. We need someone with your experience, your skills, your composure under fire." Elena laughed, though there was little humor in it. "Captain, I'm 48 years old. I haven't done a push-up since medical school, and my idea of roughing it is staying at a hotel without room service. What makes you think I'm Special Forces material? Because you've spent 2 years in active war zones with Doctors Without Borders. Because you can operate for 18 hours straight without losing focus. Because when that kid came in tonight with his guts hanging out, you didn't hesitate. You just fixed him." Sarah leaned forward, her intensity palpable. "Most people freeze when faced with life-or-death decisions. You've been making them for nearly 3 decades. Elena felt something stir in her chest, a restlessness she'd been trying to ignore for months. The comfortable routine of her life had begun to feel like a cage. Her daughter Jessica was grown and successful, living in New York with her own thriving career as an architect. The townhouse felt empty most nights, filled only with the sound of her own footsteps and the gentle hum of the orchid greenhouse she'd built off the kitchen. Even if I were interested, Elena said slowly, I'm twice the age of your typical candidate. The physical requirements alone are challenging, but not impossible. We've had older candidates succeed before. Not many, and not often, but it's been done. Sarah pulled out a tablet and showed Elena a series of photos, men and women in their 40s and 50s wearing the distinctive green beret. Dr. James Morrison earned his at 51, Captain Linda Chen at 45. They'd been in the military for years, though. You'd be starting from scratch. Elena stared at the photos, feeling an unexpected surge of possibility. When was the last time she'd been truly challenged? When had she last felt the rush of pushing beyond her comfort zone? Medical school, maybe, or those first terrifying months as a surgical resident when every decision felt like it could kill someone. What would the training involve? She heard herself asking. Sarah's smile widened. 24 weeks of hell, Dr. Vasquez. The Special Forces qualification course, followed by specialized medical training. Physical conditioning that will test every limit you thought you had. Survival training in conditions designed to break you. Psychological evaluation that will strip away every defense mechanism you've ever developed. You're not exactly selling it, Captain. I'm not trying to sell it, I'm telling you the truth. Most candidates don't make it through the first phase. The ones who do often wash out during the survival portion. But for those rare individuals who complete the program, Sarah's voice carried a reverence that made Elena's pulse quicken. They become part of something extraordinary. They save lives in ways that most medical professionals never could imagine. Elena thought about the gang member she'd just saved, wondering if he'd be back in 6 months with another bullet wound. She thought about her empty house, her comfortable routine, the department head position that would mean more administrative work and less hands-on surgery. She thought about Jessica, who worried that her mother was lonely but was too busy with her own life to visit more than twice a year. I'd have to resign my position here, Elena said, surprised to hear herself actually considering it. You'd have to take extended leave. The Army would gladly accept your expertise in exchange for the training. I could die during training. You could die crossing the street. You could die of boredom in that department head office they're offering you. Elena looked sharply at Sarah. How do you know about that? Because I make it my business to know everything about potential candidates. Dr. Vasquez, you have 20 good years left in you, maybe more. You can spend them safely, comfortably, doing work you could perform in your sleep. Or you can spend them pushing boundaries you never knew existed. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the hospital's nighttime rhythm, monitors beeping, gurneys rolling, the overhead pages that had been the soundtrack to Elena's adult life. When would I need to decide? Elena asked. Training class starts in 3 months. But I need to know within 2 weeks to begin the paperwork. Elena nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Sarah stood, extending her hand. Don't think too long, Doctor. Opportunities like this don't come around often, especially at our age. After the captain left, Elena sat in the break room for another hour, staring at her reflection in the black window. The woman looking back at her was successful, respected, financially secure. She was also, Elena realized with startling clarity, slowly dying of safety. Elena's townhouse had always been her sanctuary, a carefully curated space that reflected her journey from the poverty of her childhood to the success of her medical career. Original hardwood floors gleamed under tasteful lighting, and her collection of medical textbooks filled built-in shelves that had cost more than her first car. The orchid greenhouse off the kitchen was her pride and joy, dozens of exotic specimens in various stages of bloom, each one tended with the same precision she brought to surgery. But tonight, as she sat in her leather reading chair with a glass of Pinot Noir, the house felt like a museum, beautiful, expensive, and utterly lifeless. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Mom, got the promotion. Senior partner at 32. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate? Elena smiled, despite her mood. Jessica had inherited her drive and ambition, along with her grandmother's stubborn streak and her father's dark eyes. Elena had raised her alone after David walked out when Jessica was 3, unable to handle the demands of a surgical residence schedule and the responsibilities of fatherhood. She typed back, "Congratulations, sweetheart. So proud of you. Can't do drinks tomorrow. Working late. Rain check?" It was a lie. Elena had deliberately scheduled herself for a lighter load this week, needing time to think. But the thought of sitting in some trendy financial district bar, listening to Jessica's friends discuss their latest acquisitions and romantic complications, felt unbearable tonight. Her laptop was open on the coffee table, displaying the Special Forces recruitment website Sarah had recommended. The physical requirements were sobering, minimum standards that would challenge athletes half her age. The training timeline looked like a medieval torture schedule. The mortality and injury rates were classified, but the warnings about permanent disability were prominently displayed. Elena clicked through testimonials from successful candidates, noting that most were men in their 20s and 30s. The few women featured were uniformly young and fit, with backgrounds in military service or competitive athletics. None looked like a middle-aged doctor who got winded climbing the stairs to her bedroom. Her doorbell rang at 10:30, which was unusual. Elena's neighborhood was safe but formal, the kind of place where unexpected visitors called ahead. She opened the door to find Sarah Mitchell on her doorstep, looking oddly nervous. "Captain, is everything all right?" "I apologize for showing up unannounced, Dr. Vasquez. I was in the neighborhood and thought I might catch you." Quote, Elena stepped aside to let her in, noting that Sarah's neighborhood was nowhere near her own upscale district. The captain's presence filled the space in a way that made Elena's carefully decorated home feel suddenly cramped. "Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee? Wine?" "Coffee would be great, if it's not too much trouble." Elena busied herself in the kitchen, grateful for something to do with her hands. Through the pass-through window, she watched Sarah examine her orchids with genuine interest. "Phalaenopsis and Cattleya hybrids," Sarah observed. "Difficult to cultivate." "My grandmother grew orchids in Hawaii before the war." "World War II?" "Korean War. She was a Navy nurse, met my grandfather at Pearl Harbor." Sarah accepted the coffee cup, inhaling the aroma appreciatively. "Much better than hospital vending machine coffee." Elena settled into the chair across from her unexpected guest. "Captain, I appreciate your interest in recruiting me, but showing up at my home seems a bit unprofessional." "You're absolutely right." Sarah set down her cup and looked Elena directly in the eye. "The truth is, Dr. Vasquez, I need you specifically. Not just any experienced trauma surgeon. You." "I don't understand." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, as if debating how much to reveal. "I lost someone 6 months ago. Dr. Marcus Webb, one of our medical officers. 34 years old. Brilliant surgeon. Excellent soldier. He died in Afghanistan because he froze during a firefight. Couldn't make the transition from clinical medicine to combat medicine." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "I'm sorry for your loss." Marcus was everything we thought we wanted in a Special Forces medic. Young, strong, technically proficient. But he'd never seen real trauma, never had to make split-second decisions with bullets flying and people screaming. When it mattered most, his training wasn't enough. "And you think my experience would make the difference? I've watched you work under pressure that would break most people. I've seen you make impossible decisions without hesitation. Age and physical conditioning can be overcome with training and determination, but that kind of mental toughness, that ability to function when everything is falling apart, that's something you either have or you don't." Elena thought about the countless nights when she'd walked into trauma bays that looked like war zones. Stabbing victims, car accident casualties, overdoses, shootings. She'd seen every type of violence the human body could sustain and still survive. The chaos, the blood, the desperate urgency of saving lives while everything around you disintegrated into madness. "The physical training would be brutal for someone my age," Elena said. "Yes, it would be. We'd have to start conditioning you immediately, and even then, you might not make it through the fitness tests. The psychological evaluation would probably determine I'm having a midlife crisis." "Probably. I could die during training." "You could." Elena appreciated Sarah's honesty, even as it made her decision more difficult. "So why are you really here, Captain? What aren't you telling me?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time, Elena saw something vulnerable in her expression. "Because I've been where you are, Dr. Vasquez. Successful, comfortable, slowly suffocating on my own achievements. I enlisted at 38, after spending 15 years as a civilian paramedic. Everyone said I was too old, too set in my ways, too soft for military life. But you made it through. Barely, and it was the best decision I ever made. But I had military experience to build on, family members who understood the culture. You'd be starting from zero, with no support system, no context for what you'd be facing. Elena stood and walked to the window overlooking her garden. The view was peaceful, predictable, safe. Why does that make you more convinced I should try? Because people who have something to prove fight harder than people who have nothing to lose. You've spent your entire career being underestimated because of your gender, your background, your age. You've succeeded anyway. That's exactly the kind of determination it takes to earn a green beret. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt less uncomfortable. Elena could hear her orchid's humidifier cycling on, the familiar sound that usually brought her peace. Tonight it seemed like the ticking of a clock, counting down the moments of a life half-lived. If I said yes, Elena began slowly, when would I start? Physical conditioning would begin immediately. I'd personally oversee your preparation program. Basic training starts in 10 weeks, followed by the Special Forces qualification course. And if I wash out? Then you'd return to your life here with the knowledge that you tried something extraordinary. Most people never get that chance. Quote. Elena turned back to face Sarah. Give me one more day to decide. Sarah nodded and stood. One more day. But Dr. Vasquez, Elena, don't let fear make the decision for you. You've spent 48 years being safe. Maybe it's time to find out who you really are when safe isn't an option. After Sarah left, Elena sat in her garden until nearly dawn, surrounded by flowers she'd nurtured for years. Beautiful, delicate, contained within careful boundaries. As the sun rose over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in shades of possibility, Elena made her choice. The alarm in Elena's temporary quarters screamed at 0445, though she'd been awake for 20 minutes already. 3 weeks of pre-training conditioning had taught her that her body clock would need to adjust to military rhythm, even if her joints protested every movement. She rolled out of the narrow bunk, her muscles aching from yesterday's endurance run. At 48, she was recovering more slowly than her younger self would have, but she was recovering. The intensive fitness program Sarah had designed was working, though Elena suspected she'd need every minute of the remaining conditioning time before formal training began. Her reflection in the small mirror showed changes already. Her face was leaner, tanned from hours of outdoor training. Her hands, still steady as a surgeon's, now bore calluses from rope climbing and weight training. She'd lost 15 pounds and gained muscle mass she hadn't carried since college. More importantly, she felt alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible. "Morning, Doc." The cheerful voice belonged to Lieutenant Maria Santos, Elena's assigned training partner, and the closest thing she'd found to a friend in this intensely competitive environment. Santos was 28, a former collegiate athlete who'd joined the Army after watching her brother deploy to Iraq. She was also one of only 3 other women in their preparation group. "Morning, Maria. Ready for another day in paradise?" Santos laughed. "If paradise involves crawling through mud while someone shoots blanks over our heads, then absolutely." Elena had learned to appreciate Maria's dark humor over the past few weeks. The younger woman never treated Elena's age as a limitation, never offered condescending encouragement, never suggested she might be more comfortable in a different program. She simply accepted Elena as a peer and pushed her accordingly. "Heard from Captain Mitchell yesterday," Santos said as they made their way to the mess hall. "She's flying in to observe today's exercises." Elena felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Sarah had been supportive during the preparation phase, checking in weekly and adjusting Elena's training program based on her progress. But today would be the first time Sarah saw Elena attempting the full combat simulation that would determine her readiness for actual Special Forces training. The mess hall buzzed with nervous energy. 43 candidates remained from the original group of 60, and everyone knew that today's exercise would eliminate at least half of those who remained. Elena had watched good soldiers wash out over the past weeks, men and women who were stronger, faster, and more experienced than she was. The program didn't just test physical capabilities. It tested mental resilience under conditions designed to break even the most determined candidates. Vasquez, Staff Sergeant Williams' voice cut through the breakfast chatter. Mitchell wants to see you in the briefing room. Now. Elena left her untouched eggs and followed Williams through corridors that still felt foreign despite 3 weeks of navigation. The briefing room was small and windowless, containing only a metal table and 2 chairs. Sarah sat in one of them, reviewing a thick folder that Elena assumed contained her training records. Sit down, Elena. How are you feeling about today? The use of her first name was unusual and somehow ominous. Nervous but ready, Captain. Good. Nervous means you're taking it seriously. Sarah closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. I want to be honest with you about what you're facing today. The exercise is designed to simulate everything you'll encounter in actual combat operations. Physical challenges, psychological pressure, tactical decision-making under stress. I understand. Do you? Because I've watched a lot of good people fail this test, Elena. People younger and stronger than you. People with military backgrounds and combat experience. Elena felt her surgeon's composure settling over her like armor. Are you trying to talk me out of continuing? I'm trying to prepare you for the possibility that this might be as far as you go. There's no shame in reaching your limit here. You've already exceeded every expectation anyone had for a 48-year-old civilian. But you don't think I'll make it through today. Quote. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I think you have capabilities that even you don't fully understand yet, but capabilities aren't always enough. Sometimes the mountains are just too high, no matter how determined you are to climb them. Elena stood, feeling a surge of the determination that had carried her through medical school, through residency, through 27 years of impossible cases and split-second decisions. Captain, with all due respect, I didn't come this far to fold at the first real test. If I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail trying my absolute hardest. Sarah smiled, and Elena saw approval in her expression. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Go show them what a soft middle-aged doctor can do when she's properly motivated. The combat simulation began at noon in a mock village constructed to replicate conditions in Afghanistan. Elena's team consisted of herself and 5 other candidates, tasked with extracting wounded civilians while under enemy fire. The scenario would test everything they'd learned about battlefield medicine, tactical movement, and decision-making under pressure. As Elena checked her medical supplies one final time, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she'd been comfortable, safe, slowly dying of predictability. Now she was about to crawl through simulated hell with people young enough to be her children, chasing a dream that everyone said was impossible. The whistle blew, and Elena moved forward into whatever came next. The first explosion shattered the morning calm, sending chunks of concrete and plaster raining down on Elena's helmet. The sound was different from the controlled detonations they'd trained with, sharper, more visceral, designed to disorient and terrify. She pressed herself against the wall of what had once been a schoolhouse, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Contact left," shouted Candidate Morrison, a former Marine who'd taken point for their 6-person team. Multiple shooters in the marketplace. Elena could hear the distinctive crack of rifle fire echoing off the mock village's narrow streets. Somewhere in this maze of bullet-scarred buildings, civilian actors were waiting to be wounded and evacuated. Their job was to reach them, provide medical aid, and extract them to safety while hostile forces, played by Special Forces instructors with non-lethal ammunition, attempted to stop them. "Doc, we've got wounded civilians in the school." Candidate Williams, a young woman from Georgia with a background in emergency medical services, pointed toward the building's interior. 3 casualties, unknown status. Elena's medical training took over, suppressing the fear that threatened to paralyze her. She'd spent 3 weeks learning to function with this level of stress, but nothing had fully prepared her for the sensory overload of simulated combat. The acrid smell of smoke, the deafening noise of gunfire, the screaming of wounded actors, it all combined to create an environment of controlled chaos. "Morrison, I need suppressing fire on that marketplace," Elena commanded, surprised by the authority in her own voice. "Williams, you're with me. The rest of you establish a perimeter and watch for flanking movements." As they moved through the schoolhouse door, Elena's mind cataloged potential threats and tactical considerations with the same systematic approach she'd used for complex surgeries. Narrow hallways meant limited maneuverability. Multiple entrances created vulnerability to enemy infiltration. The sound of their movement would telegraph their position to hostile forces. The first casualty was sprawled in what had been the school's main hallway, a young actor with theatrical wounds that looked disturbingly realistic. Blood substitute pooled beneath his torso, and his breathing was rapid and shallow. Elena dropped to her knees beside him, her hands automatically beginning the primary assessment that had become second nature over decades of trauma medicine. Penetrating chest wound, probable pneumothorax, she announced to Williams. I need chest seals and a 14-gauge needle for decompression. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, even as gunfire continued to echo from outside. This was familiar territory. The urgent calculation of injury severity, the prioritization of treatment steps, the calm focus that came when someone's life depended on her expertise. The fact that this particular life was fictional didn't matter. Her training had taught her to treat every scenario as if it were real. Second casualty in the next room, Williams reported. Looks like a GSW to the abdomen. Elena finished stabilizing the chest wound and moved to assess the second victim. Abdominal gunshot wounds were among the most challenging injuries to treat in field conditions. Too much could go wrong too quickly without proper surgical facilities. She'd have to decide whether to attempt field treatment or prioritize evacuation. The actor playing the wounded civilian was convincing in his agony, moaning and clutching his stomach while artificial blood seeped between his fingers. Elena's assessment revealed signs of internal bleeding and possible organ damage, conditions that would require immediate surgical intervention in a real scenario. We need to move him now, Elena told Williams. This one won't survive without immediate surgery. Can you handle the chest wound patient? Williams nodded, though Elena could see the younger woman's nervousness. This was the kind of decision-making that separated successful Special Forces medics from those who washed out. The ability to triage effectively under pressure, making life-or-death choices with incomplete information. A fresh burst of gunfire erupted from somewhere close by, followed by Morrison's voice over their radio. Enemy movement on the north side. They're trying to flank us. Elena looked around the schoolroom, noting the tactical situation with growing concern. They had multiple casualties requiring evacuation, limited manpower for security, and hostile forces closing in on their position. In a real scenario, this was exactly the type of situation where medical personnel often became casualties themselves. Williams, can you move that chest wound on your own? I think so, but... No buts. We have to move now, or we're all going to be trapped in here. Elena shouldered her medical pack and grabbed the abdominal wound patient under his arms. Morrison, we need an extraction route. Working on it, Doc. Give me 30 seconds. 30 seconds felt like an eternity as Elena dragged her patient toward the rear exit, William struggling with her own casualty a few feet behind. The sound of gunfire was getting closer, and Elena could hear the instructors shouting tactical commands that suggested they were preparing for a final assault on the school building. Her patient, she'd started thinking of him as real despite knowing better, was losing consciousness from simulated blood loss. In an actual medical emergency, she'd be calculating fluid replacement needs, monitoring vital signs, preparing for potential complications. Here, she had to trust that her treatment had been sufficient while focusing on the immediate problem of survival. Exit's clear! Morrison appeared in the doorway, his rifle trained on the street outside. But we've got about 100 meters of open ground before we reach the extraction point. Elena assessed the situation with the same methodical approach she used for complex surgical procedures. Open ground meant exposure to enemy fire. 2 casualty patients meant slow movement. Limited security meant vulnerability to attack from multiple directions. Single file, me first with the critical patient, she decided quickly. Williams second with the chest wound. Morrison brings up the rear with covering fire. Move fast, stay low, and don't stop for anything. The sprint across open ground was the longest 100 meters of Elena's life. Her patient was a dead weight in her arms, and her 48-year-old body protested every step. Simulated gunfire erupted from multiple positions, and she could hear the whistle of training rounds passing overhead. Halfway across the courtyard, Williams stumbled, nearly dropping her patient. Elena's instinct was to stop and help, but her tactical training overrode her medical impulses. In combat, stopping to help often resulted in more casualties. The best way to save everyone was to reach safety as quickly as possible. Keep moving, she shouted without looking back. Don't stop! Elena reached the extraction point, a concrete bunker representing a medical evacuation helicopter, with her lungs burning and her legs shaking from exertion. Behind her, Williams was struggling but still moving. Morrison's rifle continued to bark as he provided covering fire for their retreat. Casualties secured. Elena reported to the evaluation team, watching from a nearby observation post. Ready for medical evacuation. As the exercise whistle blew, signaling the end of the scenario, Elena collapsed against the bunker wall, her medical pack sliding off her aching shoulders. Around her, the other candidates were in similar states of exhaustion, some celebrating their success, others clearly devastated by their performance. "How do you think we did?" Williams asked, breathing heavily. Elena looked back at the mock village where they'd just spent the most intense hour of her training so far. "I think we learned something about ourselves today." Sarah Mitchell appeared at Elena's side, her expression unreadable. "Walk with me, doctor." They moved away from the other candidates, finding a quiet spot near the training facility's fence line. Elena waited for Sarah's assessment, feeling simultaneously proud of her performance and anxious about its adequacy. "You made good tactical decisions under pressure," Sarah began. "Your medical assessments were thorough and accurate. You maintained composure when everything was falling apart around you." "But?" Sarah smiled. "But nothing. Elena, you just completed one of the most challenging field exercises in our training program. Most candidates your age wouldn't have made it through the first 10 minutes. Elena felt a surge of pride mixed with disbelief. "So I passed?" "You more than passed. You led that team through a scenario that eliminated dozens of younger, more experienced candidates." Sarah's expression grew serious. "But this was just the beginning. The real training starts next week, and everything you've experienced so far will seem like a warm-up exercise." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. She'd proven to herself that she could function under combat stress, but special forces training would push her far beyond anything she'd experienced in her civilian life or medical career. "Captain, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you first approached me at the hospital, did you really think I could make it this far?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the other candidates gathering their equipment. "I thought you had the potential, but potential and ability are different things. Today you proved that your potential wasn't just wishful thinking." As they walked back toward the training facility, Elena caught sight of herself in a window reflection. The woman looking back was no longer the comfortable surgeon who'd lived in Pacific Heights. She was leaner, harder, more alive than she'd been in years, but she was also standing at the threshold of challenges that would test every limit she thought she had. The real training was about to begin. The bus to Camp McCall departed Fort Bragg at 03:00 on a Monday morning that felt more like the depths of winter than early spring in North Carolina. Elena sat near the front, her gear bag stowed overhead, watching the pre-dawn darkness slide past the windows. Around her, 37 other candidates dozed or stared silently into the gloom, each lost in their own thoughts about what the next 3 weeks would bring. SFAS Special Forces Assessment and Selection was the gateway to everything Elena had been working toward. Unlike the preparatory training she'd completed, this phase would be run entirely by Special Forces instructors, whose job was to identify which candidates possessed the mental and physical resilience necessary for the full qualification course. The failure rate was legendary. Fewer than 30% of candidates successfully completed the program. At 48, Elena was not only the oldest candidate in her class, but also the oldest person to attempt SFAS in the program's recorded history. She learned this fact from Staff Sergeant Peterson during her final medical evaluation, delivered with the casual brutality that seemed to characterize military communication. "Doc, I want you to understand what you're walking into," Peterson had said while reviewing her physical fitness scores. "SFAS isn't designed to be passable. It's designed to break people. Strong people. Young people. People who've been preparing for this their entire military careers." Elena nodded, understanding the warning behind his words. But she'd also spent the previous 4 weeks watching younger, stronger candidates quit during training exercises that she'd completed successfully. Physical capability was only part of the equation. Mental resilience often proved more important than raw strength or speed. The bus pulled into Camp McCall as the sun was rising, revealing a landscape that looked like it had been designed by someone with a deep understanding of human suffering. Endless pine forests stretched in every direction, broken only by swamps, hills, and obstacle courses that would have challenged medieval siege engineers. The air carried the scent of pine needles and something else. Fear, perhaps, or the accumulated sweat of thousands of candidates who'd attempted this challenge before. "Welcome to the suck, candidates." Master Sergeant Rodriguez's voice carried across the formation of new arrivals, like a physical force. Elena had heard about Rodriguez during her preparatory training, a 23-year Special Forces veteran who'd served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and several classified locations. His reputation for breaking overconfident candidates was matched only by his skill at identifying those rare individuals who possessed true Special Forces potential. "For the next 21 days, your life belongs to me and my staff. You will eat when we tell you to eat, sleep when we tell you to sleep, and move when we tell you to move. Some of you think you're ready for this because you've completed airborne training or ranger school, or spent a few years in conventional infantry units." Rodriguez's gaze swept across the formation, lingering briefly on Elena. She could feel the weight of his assessment, the calculation behind his eyes as he evaluated her presence among the younger candidates. "You're wrong. Everything you think you know about being a soldier is about to be stripped away and rebuilt from the ground up. By the time we're done with you, the weak will have quit, the unprepared will have been eliminated, and only those with true Special Forces potential will remain." The first test began immediately. Candidates were required to complete a 12-mile ruck march carrying 50 pounds of equipment in under 3 hours. Elena had trained extensively for this requirement, but training and reality proved to be different experiences entirely. The pace was brutal from the first step. Younger candidates surged ahead, their longer strides and superior cardiovascular conditioning giving them significant advantages on the rolling terrain. Elena found herself falling toward the back of the formation within the first mile, her shorter legs struggling to match the rhythm set by candidates half her age. But she'd learned something during her years of trauma surgery that many of her competitors hadn't yet discovered. Endurance wasn't just about physical capability. It was about mental discipline, about finding ways to continue functioning when your body wanted to quit. Elena settled into a sustainable pace, focusing on technical precision rather than raw speed. Her pack was properly balanced, her stride efficient, her breathing controlled. While other candidates burned energy trying to maintain unsustainable speeds, she conserved her strength for the long haul. By mile 8, the formation had begun to string out significantly. Several candidates had already dropped out with injuries or exhaustion. Elena found herself passing people who'd left her behind in the early miles, their initial burst of speed having given way to cramping, dehydration, and the kind of fatigue that comes from poor pacing strategy. "Looking strong, Doc." The voice belonged to candidate Thompson, a former Marine sergeant who'd been one of Elena's training partners during the preparatory phase. At 26, Thompson possessed the kind of natural athleticism that Elena envied, but he'd also developed a respect for her persistence and tactical thinking. "Just trying to stay ahead of the cutoff time," Elena replied, though she was secretly pleased by her performance. Her legs were aching and her shoulders burned from the pack's weight, but she felt strong enough to maintain her current pace for several more miles. The final 4 miles tested every aspect of Elena's preparation. The terrain grew more challenging, incorporating steep hills and muddy creek crossings that turned each step into a struggle for balance and momentum. Her pack seemed to gain weight with each mile, and she could feel blisters forming inside her boots despite the careful attention she'd paid to proper fit and sock selection. But she also felt something she hadn't experienced since medical school, the exhilaration of pushing past her perceived limitations. Every step was a victory over the voice in her head that whispered about age and inadequacy. Every mile was proof that determination could compensate for disadvantages in youth and natural ability. Elena crossed the finish line with 11 minutes to spare, her time placing her in the middle third of successful candidates. Not impressive by objective standards, but sufficient to continue to the next phase of testing. More importantly, she'd proven to herself that she belonged in this environment. "Not bad for an old lady," commented Sergeant Rodriguez as he checked her time off his stopwatch, but the ruck march was the easy part. Elena looked around at the 28 candidates who'd successfully completed the first test, noting the 9 who'd been eliminated by injury, exhaustion, or simply giving up. The attrition rate was already approaching 30%, and they hadn't even begun the truly challenging portions of the program. "What's next, Sergeant?" Rodriguez smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. "Next, Doc, we find out if you can think clearly when you're tired, hungry, and scared. That's where most people discover their limits." The land navigation course at Camp McCall was designed to test more than just a candidate's ability to read maps and use a compass. It was a comprehensive evaluation of decision-making under stress, time management under pressure, and the kind of mental resilience required to continue functioning when physical exhaustion made clear thinking nearly impossible. Elena stared at the topographical map spread across the hood of a military vehicle, her headlamp casting harsh shadows across the contour lines that would determine her fate over the next 18 hours. Around her, other candidates were conducting their own route planning, but the rules prohibited any communication or collaboration. Each person would navigate the 40-square-mile course alone, responsible for finding 8 designated points scattered across terrain that ranged from dense forest to treacherous swampland. "You have 15 minutes to complete your route planning," announced Sergeant First Class Williams, one of Rodriguez's primary instructors. "Once you begin movement, you'll have 18 hours to locate all 8 points and return to this position. Miss any point or exceed the time limit, and you're eliminated from the program." Elena studied the map with the same systematic approach she'd used for complex surgical procedures. Each checkpoint was marked with coordinates that she had to convert to actual locations on the ground, then plan an efficient route that would minimize travel time, while avoiding obvious hazards like swamps, steep terrain, and areas where she might become lost or injured. The challenge was complicated by the fact that navigation would be conducted both during daylight and in complete darkness. Elena would need to plan her route to ensure she could find the more difficult checkpoints while she still had natural light, saving the easier targets for nighttime navigation when visibility would be severely limited. Her experience with Doctors Without Borders in Afghanistan had given her some familiarity with map reading and GPS navigation, but this was an entirely different level of complexity. The military maps showed features and used symbols that were foreign to her civilian experience, and the terrain itself was more challenging than anything she'd encountered in her medical missions overseas. "Time!" Williams called out. "Maps down, equipment check, then you're released for movement." Elena shouldered her pack, now loaded with 70 pounds of equipment including water, food, emergency shelter, and all the navigation tools she'd need for the next 18 hours. The additional weight was immediately noticeable after the 50-pound load she'd carried during the ruck march, but she'd trained extensively with heavy packs and felt confident in her ability to manage the burden. Her first checkpoint was located approximately 4 miles to the northeast, in an area of dense forest that the map showed as relatively flat terrain. Elena had chosen this as her starting point because it appeared to offer the most straightforward navigation, allowing her to build confidence before tackling the more challenging targets later in the course. The first mile through the pine forest was deceptively easy. The terrain matched her map reading, and she was able to maintain a steady pace while checking her compass bearing every few hundred meters. But as she moved deeper into the woods, Elena began to understand why land navigation eliminated so many candidates. The forest was a maze of identical-looking trees with few distinctive landmarks to confirm her position. What had appeared as flat terrain on the topographical map revealed itself as a series of subtle ridges and depressions that made straight-line navigation nearly impossible. Every few minutes, Elena had to stop and shoot a new compass bearing, then attempt to identify terrain features that would confirm her location. Her first checkpoint was supposed to be located near a small creek bed, marked on the map as a thin blue line. But when Elena reached what she believed was the correct location, she found no creek and no checkpoint. The frustration was immediate and overwhelming. Had she misread the map? Made an error in her compass work? Gotten turned around in the identical-looking forest? Elena forced herself to remain calm, applying the same methodical problem-solving approach that had served her through thousands of medical emergencies. She spread her map on the ground, identified her last known position, and carefully retraced her route step by step. The error became apparent quickly. She'd been following a magnetic bearing without accounting for the declination between magnetic north and true north, a small mistake that had led her several hundred meters off course. 20 minutes of backtracking brought her to the correct creek bed and her first checkpoint, marked by a small metal tag hanging from a tree branch. Elena recorded the identifying number in her logbook, feeling a surge of satisfaction mixed with concern about the time she'd lost due to her navigation error. 7 checkpoints remained, scattered across terrain that would test every aspect of her preparation. Elena checked her watch. calculated her average pace, and realized that she had no time to waste if she hoped to complete the course within the 18-hour limit. The second checkpoint was located 5 miles to the south, in an area the map showed as marshland. Elena had deliberately saved this target for daylight hours, knowing that navigating through swamp and darkness would be nearly impossible. But even with full visibility, the terrain proved more challenging than she'd anticipated. The marshland was a patchwork of standing water, thick vegetation, and unstable ground that made every step a careful calculation. Elena's boots sank into mud with each stride, and she had to use fallen logs and patches of higher ground to avoid areas where she might become trapped or lose her equipment in the murky water. Worse than the physical challenge was the disorientation caused by the lack of reliable landmarks. In the dense forest, Elena had at least been able to use individual trees or rock formations to track her progress. Here, everything looked the same, an endless expanse of reeds, standing water, and low vegetation that blocked her view of distant terrain features. Elena was forced to rely entirely on her compass and pace counting, techniques she'd practiced but never trusted completely. Every 100 meters, she stopped to check her bearing and estimate her position on the map. The process was time-consuming and mentally exhausting, requiring constant attention to details that could mean the difference between success and elimination. The checkpoint, when she finally located it, was positioned on a small island of dry ground in the middle of the swamp. Elena recorded the number, refilled her water bottles from a purification source marked on her map, and checked her overall progress. 4 hours had elapsed, and she'd completed only 2 of 8 required checkpoints. She was falling behind the pace necessary to finish within the time limit. The third checkpoint was located in hills that rose abruptly from the surrounding flatland, marked on the map as a 200-foot elevation gain over less than half a mile. Elena approached the climb with a mixture of determination and dread, knowing that her age and conditioning would be most apparent during this type of sustained physical challenge. The ascent was brutal. Her pack seemed to double in weight with each step, and her breathing became labored within the first 100 meters of climbing. Around her, she could see the tracks and discarded equipment of other candidates who'd passed this way earlier, some clearly struggling as much as she was. But Elena also discovered something about herself during that climb. While her cardiovascular system was clearly being pushed to its limits, her mental state remained focused and determined. She'd spent years working 18-hour surgeries, maintaining concentration and precision, when physical exhaustion would have defeated less experienced doctors. The hills were testing her body, but her mind remained sharp and tactical. She reached the checkpoint, located at the summit of the highest hill, just as the sun was beginning to set. Elena recorded the number, ate a quick meal of energy bars and electrolyte drink, and prepared for the most challenging portion of the navigation course, finding 5 checkpoints in complete darkness. Night navigation was an entirely different challenge from daylight route finding. Elena's headlamp provided a narrow cone of visibility that made it impossible to see terrain features more than a few meters away. Every shadow could conceal an obstacle. Every change in vegetation might indicate she was moving off course. But darkness also provided advantages that Elena hadn't anticipated. With her vision restricted, she found herself relying more heavily on other senses that she'd developed during her medical career. The sound of her footsteps told her about changes in terrain. The feel of vegetation against her legs indicated when she was moving through different types of cover. Even the smell of the air provided clues about her location. The musty odor of swampland, the clean scent of higher elevations, the distinctive aroma of different types of trees. Elena's 4th checkpoint was located in another section of dense forest, marked on the map as being near a distinctive bend in a dirt road. Finding the road in darkness took nearly 2 hours of careful navigation, but once she located it, following the bend to the checkpoint was relatively straightforward. Her 5th and 6th checkpoints were positioned in open fields that allowed for faster movement but provided fewer landmarks for navigation reference. Elena found both targets within an hour of each other, her confidence building as she began to trust her navigation skills even in challenging conditions. The 7th checkpoint proved more elusive. Located in a section of mixed terrain that included both forest and marsh, Elena spent over an hour searching for a target that seemed to exist only on her map. Fatigue was beginning to affect her judgment, and she found herself second-guessing navigation decisions that she would have trusted earlier in the course. It was nearly 0200 hours when Elena finally located the seventh checkpoint, hanging from a tree branch at the edge of a small clearing. She was exhausted, her feet were blistered from 14 hours of walking, and she had less than 4 hours remaining to find her final checkpoint and return to the starting point. The eighth checkpoint was the most distant from her current position, requiring a 5-mile movement through terrain that included all the challenges she'd already encountered: forest, marsh, hills, and open ground. Elena calculated her remaining time, estimated her current pace, and realized that she had no margin for error. Any significant navigation mistakes or delays would result in elimination from the program. She set off through the pre-dawn darkness with grim determination, her headlamp beam cutting through the gloom as she navigated by compass bearing toward her final target. Her pack felt heavier than ever, her legs were shaking with fatigue, and every step was a conscious act of will. But Elena also felt something that reminded her of the most challenging surgeries of her career, a clarity of purpose that came when everything was on the line. She wasn't just navigating through a forest. She was proving that age and inexperience could be overcome by determination and careful preparation. The final checkpoint was located at the base of a small hill, marked by coordinates that Elena had to convert to an actual location using triangulation from nearby terrain features. When she finally spotted the metal tag hanging from its designated tree, Elena felt a surge of accomplishment that rivaled any successful surgery she'd ever performed. She recorded the number, checked her watch, and realized she had 90 minutes to cover the 4 miles back to the starting point. The return journey was the longest 4 miles of her life, but Elena maintained a steady pace despite her exhaustion, driven by the knowledge that she was within reach of successfully completing one of the most challenging tests she'd ever attempted. Elena crossed the finish line with 12 minutes to spare, collapsing next to the vehicle where she'd begun her route planning 18 hours earlier. Around her, other candidates were in various states of exhaustion and celebration, some having completed the course successfully, others clearly devastated by their elimination from the program. "How'd you do, Doc?" Thompson asked, appearing at her side with his own completion certificate. Elena held up her logbook, showing the 8 recorded checkpoint numbers that proved her successful navigation. "Somehow, I made it." Sergeant Rodriguez approached, reviewing Elena's paperwork with the same attention to detail she'd seen him apply to every aspect of the training program. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up and nodded. "Congratulations, Dr. Vasquez, you've successfully completed the land navigation phase of SFAS." Elena felt tears forming in her eyes, though whether from exhaustion, relief, or pride, she couldn't say. She'd proven that she could navigate 40 square miles of challenging terrain in 18 hours, functioning effectively despite physical exhaustion and mental stress that would have defeated her just months earlier. But as she looked around at the candidates who'd been eliminated during the navigation course, Elena understood that this was just another step in a journey that would continue to test her limits in ways she couldn't yet imagine. "What's next, Sergeant?" Rodriguez smiled with what might have been approval. "Next, Doc, we see how you function when you haven't slept for 3 days and everyone around you is trying to make you quit." Elena nodded, understanding that the real test was just beginning. The sleep deprivation began immediately after the land navigation phase ended. Instead of the recovery time Elena had hoped for, candidates were immediately assigned to continuous team exercises designed to test their ability to function effectively while operating on minimal rest and maximum stress. Elena found herself assigned to Team Charlie, a 6-person unit that included Thompson, 2 former Marines named Jackson and Williams, a Navy corpsman called Rodriguez, no relation to the instructor, and a former Army Ranger named Davidson, who'd been selected for Special Forces after completing multiple combat deployments in Iraq. At 48, Elena was not only the oldest member of her team, but also the only one without prior military experience. The others had years of training in military tactics, team dynamics, and the kind of sleep-deprived problem-solving that Special Forces training was designed to evaluate. Elena felt the weight of their unspoken skepticism, even from Thompson, who'd been supportive during her earlier training phases. "First mission briefing in 30 minutes, announced Sergeant First Class Martinez, Team Charlie's assigned evaluator. "You'll have 15 minutes to plan, then immediate execution. No breaks, no do-overs, no excuses." Elena used the brief preparation time to review her equipment and try to steel herself mentally for whatever was coming. Around her, the other team members conducted their own preparations with the kind of quiet professionalism that spoke to years of military experience. She felt like a civilian playing dress-up in someone else's uniform. The first mission was deceptively simple. Transport a 200-pound wooden crate across a series of obstacles including walls, ditches, and water barriers, with the constraint that no team member could carry the crate alone or allow it to touch the ground. The exercise was designed to test teamwork, problem-solving, and leadership under physical stress. "I'll take point," Davidson announced immediately, his Ranger background making him the obvious choice for team leadership. "Jackson and Williams, you're our heavy lifters. Thompson and Rodriguez provide support. Doc." He paused, clearly uncertain about Elena's role in the operation. "I'll do whatever the team needs," Elena replied, understanding the subtext of his hesitation. As the weakest member physically, she would likely be assigned support roles that kept her from slowing down the primary mission. The first obstacle was a 6-foot wall that required the team to lift the crate over while maintaining control and preventing it from touching the ground. Elena found herself positioned as a spotter, helping to guide the crate while her stronger teammates provided the lifting power. But as the team worked through increasingly complex obstacles, Elena began to notice problems with Davidson's leadership approach. His Ranger background had taught him to solve problems through aggressive action and superior physical capability, approaches that worked well with elite infantry units but proved less effective when the team included members with different strengths and capabilities. "Davidson, what if we try a different approach for the water crossing?" Elena suggested during a brief planning pause. She'd been studying the obstacle while the others focused on immediate execution, and she'd identified a technique that would utilize the team's collective problem-solving abilities rather than relying solely on brute strength. "Doc, just focus on keeping up," Davidson replied curtly. "We've got this handled." But they didn't have it handled. Davidson's approach to the water crossing, having the strongest team members wade across while carrying the crate overhead, resulted in near disaster when Jackson slipped on the muddy bottom and nearly dropped their cargo. Only quick reactions from multiple team members prevented mission failure. "Time," Martinez called out, checking his stopwatch. "Mission incomplete. Crate touched the ground during water crossing." Elena felt the weight of the team's disappointment, even though she'd followed Davidson's leadership and hadn't been responsible for the tactical decisions that led to failure. In the military environment, team failure was individual failure, and individual failure was often grounds for elimination from the program. "Second mission briefing in 10 minutes, Martinez announced. "New constraints, new timeline, same standards." During the brief preparation period, Elena found herself paired with Thompson for equipment check. The former Marine looked exhausted already, and they'd only completed one exercise in what would be a continuous series lasting for days. "That didn't go well," Thompson observed quietly. "Davidson's approach worked in Ranger units, but we're not Rangers," Elena replied carefully. "We need to find ways to use everyone's strengths instead of compensating for perceived weaknesses." Thompson looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You think you could do better?" Elena considered the question seriously. Leadership in special forces required more than just military experience or physical capability. It required the ability to assess complex situations quickly, develop effective plans under pressure, and motivate team members to perform beyond their perceived limitations. "I think I could do differently," Elena answered. "Whether that would be better remains to be seen." The second mission required the team to construct a rope bridge across a 20-foot gap, then transport all team members and equipment to the other side within a specified time frame. Again, Davidson assumed leadership, but his approach focused on speed and aggression rather than careful planning and risk management. Elena watched as her teammates struggled with knot-tying techniques that Davidson had learned in Ranger School but hadn't effectively communicated to team members with different training backgrounds. Rodriguez, the Navy corpsman, clearly knew alternative approaches that might work better, but Davidson's leadership style discouraged input from subordinates. "Davidson," Elena said during a brief pause in construction, "Rodriguez has some ideas about rope work that might help us move faster." "Doc, I need you to focus on your own responsibilities," Davidson snapped, his frustration evident. "Everyone else, just follow my lead and we'll get through this." But following Davidson's lead resulted in another mission failure, when the hastily constructed bridge couldn't support the weight of fully equipped team members. Williams fell into the water, damaging critical equipment and exceeding the time limit for mission completion. Mission failure, Martinez announced. Poor planning, inadequate risk assessment, failure to utilize team resources effectively. Elena could see the evaluation taking its toll on her teammates. Jackson and Williams looked demoralized despite their strong individual performance. Thompson appeared to be questioning his own capabilities. Even Davidson was beginning to show signs of self-doubt, though his military bearing prevented him from expressing uncertainty openly. Third mission briefing in 5 minutes, Martinez called out. Team leadership rotation. Dr. Vasquez, you're in charge. Elena felt every eye on the team focus on her as Martinez's words registered. At 48, with no military experience and the weakest physical capabilities of any team member, she was being asked to lead 5 combat veterans through a mission that would determine whether any of them continued in the Special Forces program. "You've got to be kidding me," Davidson muttered, though he kept his voice low enough that Martinez might not have heard. Elena understood his reaction. From his perspective, putting her in charge was setting the team up for failure. But she also understood something that Davidson's military experience might have obscured. Leadership wasn't about being the strongest or most experienced member of a group. It was about finding ways to help every team member contribute their best capabilities toward achieving a common goal. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. "Listen up," Elena said, gathering the team around her. "I know I'm not the obvious choice for leadership here. I'm older, weaker, and less experienced than any of you. But I've spent 27 years making life-or-death decisions under pressure, and I've learned a few things about teamwork that might help us succeed." She could see skepticism in their faces, but also a willingness to listen that spoke to their desperation after 2 consecutive mission failures. First, we're going to take 30 seconds to hear from everyone about their individual strengths and capabilities. Not what your MOS was or what school you graduated from, but what you're personally good at that might help this team succeed. Elena went around the circle, listening as each team member identified specific skills and experience that could contribute to mission success. Thompson had construction experience from civilian work before joining the Marines. Rodriguez had maritime training that included small boat operations and water survival. Jackson had grown up rock climbing and understood rope work better than his military training had indicated. Second, we're going to spend 2 minutes, not more, developing a plan that uses those capabilities instead of trying to overcome them. And third, we're going to trust each other to execute our individual responsibilities without micromanagement. The third mission required the team to navigate through a complex obstacle course while carrying a wounded team member, with constraints that prevented simple brute force solutions. Elena's approach was to assign specific responsibilities based on individual capabilities, rather than trying to have everyone do everything. Thompson used his construction background to identify the most efficient path through the obstacles. Rodriguez applied his maritime training to water crossings. Jackson handled all rope work, using techniques he'd learned outside the military. Davidson and Williams provided security and heavy lifting, where their physical capabilities were most valuable. Elena coordinated the overall effort, making tactical decisions and adjusting the plan as conditions changed, but trusting each team member to execute their responsibilities without constant supervision. The result was the smoothest team operation Elena had witnessed during her time in training. Each obstacle was approached methodically with clear assignment of roles and responsibilities. When problems arose, team members adapted using their individual expertise rather than waiting for detailed instructions from leadership. "Time!" Martinez called out as the team completed the final obstacle. Mission success. Excellent time. No injuries. Effective use of team resources. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction that rivaled her best moments in surgery. She'd proven that leadership was about more than military experience or physical capability. It was about understanding how to help people contribute their best efforts toward achieving something they couldn't accomplish alone. "Outstanding leadership, Doc," Thompson said quietly as they gathered their equipment. "That was the best team operation I've seen since we started training." Even Davidson approached her afterward, his earlier hostility replaced by something that might have been respect. "I owe you an apology, Dr. Vasquez. I let my assumptions get in the way of recognizing your capabilities." Elena nodded, understanding that Davidson's reaction had been natural given his background and training. No apology necessary. We all bring different strengths to the team. The key is figuring out how to use them effectively. But as they prepared for the next phase of team exercises, Elena understood that leadership success was only one element of the overall evaluation. She still had to prove that she could maintain her performance under increasing levels of physical and mental stress, operating on minimal sleep and maximum pressure for days at a time. Sergeant Martinez approached as the team conducted post-mission equipment checks. Dr. Vasquez, effective leadership on that exercise. But this was just the beginning of leadership evaluation. Tomorrow, we'll see how you function when you've been awake for 48 hours, and every decision feels like it could get someone killed. Elena nodded, feeling both pride in her recent success and apprehension about the challenges that lay ahead. She'd proven that she could lead effectively under controlled conditions, but Special Forces operations would require leadership capabilities that functioned reliably under the most extreme stress imaginable. Understood, Sergeant. What's the next mission? Martinez smiled with what Elena was beginning to recognize as anticipation rather than encouragement. Next, Doc, we find out if leadership abilities survive when the leader is too tired to think clearly and too exhausted to care about anything except getting through the next hour. Elena looked around at her teammates, all of whom were showing signs of the fatigue and stress that would only intensify over the coming days. Whatever leadership capabilities she demonstrated during the past exercise would need to be sustainable under conditions designed to break even the most determined candidates. The real test was just beginning. We're deep into this incredible story now, and I hope you're as captivated as I am by these unfolding events. The amount of effort that goes into researching, writing, and narrating these novel-length stories is immense. We're talking about creating content equivalent to a published book, but it's worth it to bring you stories that truly engage and transport you to another world. If you're enjoying this journey so far, please take a second to like this video and share it with friends who appreciate great storytelling. Your support means everything and helps us continue creating these detailed, epic narratives. We still have so much more to discover together, so let's see how this situation unfolds. Sleep deprivation was a weapon that Special Forces instructors wielded with surgical precision. Elena had been awake for 36 hours when Sergeant Martinez announced the next phase of team evaluation, a continuous 48-hour mission simulation that would test every aspect of leadership, teamwork, and individual resilience under conditions of extreme fatigue. This is where we separate the pretenders from the real deal, Martinez explained to the assembled teams. Elena's Team Charlie was one of only 12 teams remaining from the original 20 that had begun SFAS. Attrition had been steady and ruthless, eliminating candidates who couldn't adapt to the physical demands, mental pressure, or team dynamics required for Special Forces qualification. Elena felt the exhaustion in her bones, a deep weariness that made every thought seem to require enormous effort. Her teammates were in similar condition. Thompson's usual alertness had given way to a 1,000-yard stare, Rodriguez kept nodding off during briefings, and even Davidson's military bearing showed cracks as fatigue wore down his natural resilience. But Elena also recognized something from her medical training that the younger candidates might not yet understand. Extreme fatigue was as much a mental state as a physical condition. During her residency, she'd learned to function effectively during 36-hour shifts by compartmentalizing her awareness, focusing only on the immediate task while letting her unconscious mind handle routine functions. Mission parameters are as follows, Martinez continued, consulting a thick folder that Elena suspected contained enough contingencies to keep them occupied for the full 48 hours. Your team will conduct reconnaissance, prisoner evacuation, medical treatment, and direct action missions across a 40-square-mile operational area. Each mission will be evaluated independently, but your overall performance will be assessed as a continuous operation. Elena studied the map that Martinez distributed, noting the complexity of the terrain they'd be expected to cover. The operational area included dense forest, swampland, urban environments, and mountainous terrain that would challenge their navigation and movement capabilities even under ideal conditions. Operating for 48 continuous hours in such an environment while completing complex missions would push every aspect of their training to its limits. Dr. Vasquez, Martinez called out, your team will begin with a medical evacuation scenario. Casualty location will be transmitted to you once you reach your initial objective. Time starts now. Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied high-stakes medical emergencies, but this time it was tempered by the bone-deep exhaustion that made concentration difficult. She gathered her team around the operational map, noting their current position and the grid coordinates of their initial objective. Thompson, plot our route to the objective. Rodriguez, check medical supplies and equipment. Davidson, assess security requirements for the operational area. Elena's leadership approach remained systematic despite her fatigue, breaking complex problems into manageable components that could be handled by individual team members. But she could see the exhaustion affecting her teammates' performance in ways that would have been unthinkable during their earlier training phases. Thompson's normally precise map reading included small errors that could lead them off course. Rodriguez's equipment checks were less thorough than usual. Even Davidson's tactical assessments seemed to lack the depth and detail that had characterized his earlier work. Elena, Thompson said quietly, using her first name for the first time since training began, we're all running on fumes here. How do we maintain operational effectiveness when we can barely think straight? It was a fair question, and one that Elena had been grappling with herself. During her medical residency, she'd learned that extreme fatigue created predictable patterns of cognitive decline, decreased attention to detail, impaired decision-making, increased likelihood of errors that could prove catastrophic in medical or military contexts. We adapt our approach, Elena replied, gathering the team closer so she could speak quietly without being overheard by instructors. In surgery, when you're operating on hour 30 of a shift, you don't try to maintain the same level of complex thinking you had when you were fresh. You rely more heavily on established protocols, double-check everything, and use your teammates to catch mistakes you might miss. She could see understanding dawning in their exhausted faces. Davidson, despite his earlier skepticism about her leadership, nodded slowly. Simplified planning, redundant checking, clear communication, he summarized. Like combat operations when you're taking casualties and everything's going to hell. Exactly. We're going to move slower, think more deliberately, and watch each other's backs more carefully than we normally would. Elena looked around at her team, seeing the same grim determination she'd witnessed in trauma teams during the worst nights at San Francisco General. And we're going to trust that our training will carry us through when our conscious minds aren't operating at full capacity. The movement to their initial objective took longer than Elena had anticipated. The terrain was more challenging than their map indicated, and their pace was significantly slower than it would have been under normal circumstances. But the team maintained formation discipline and navigation accuracy, reaching the designated coordinates without the kind of major errors that fatigue might have caused with a less systematic approach. Their casualty was waiting in a mock village constructed to replicate urban combat conditions. The wounded soldier, played by an instructor, had simulated injuries that included a sucking chest wound, possible internal bleeding, and signs of shock that would require immediate medical intervention under field conditions. Elena dropped to her knees beside the casualty, her medical training taking over despite her exhaustion. Her hands moved automatically through the primary assessment protocols she'd performed thousands of times, identifying life-threatening injuries and prioritizing treatment steps based on urgency and available resources. Penetrating chest wound with probable tension pneumothorax, she announced to her team while beginning treatment procedures. Rodriguez, I need chest seals and a 14-gauge needle for decompression. Thompson, prepare a litter for evacuation. Davidson, establish security perimeter. Working on the simulated casualty felt like stepping back into familiar territory. Elena's hands were steady despite her fatigue, her diagnostic skills sharp, despite the sleep deprivation that was affecting other aspects of her performance. This was what she'd spent 27 years learning to do under pressure, save lives when everything else was falling apart. Treatment complete, Elena announced after stabilizing the chest wound and addressing the most immediate threats to the casualty's survival. Ready for evacuation to medical facility. Outstanding work, Doc, the instructor playing the wounded soldier said quietly, breaking character briefly. That was textbook battlefield medicine, under realistic conditions. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction, but also awareness that this had been only the first mission in a series that would continue for another 45 hours. Whatever energy reserves she'd drawn upon to perform effectively here would need to be sustainable across multiple operations with minimal rest or recovery time. Next mission briefing in 30 minutes, Martinez announced, as Team Charlie completed their casualty evacuation. Direct action scenario. high-value target capture, urban environment. Elena looked around at her teammates, all of whom were showing increasing signs of fatigue and stress. Thompson was developing the hollow-eyed look that came with severe sleep deprivation. Rodriguez kept making small mistakes in equipment handling that suggested declining motor coordination. Even Davidson's military bearing was beginning to show cracks as exhaustion wore down his natural resilience. But she also saw something else in their faces: a growing confidence in her leadership and a willingness to trust her tactical decisions even when they contradicted conventional military wisdom. The successful medical evacuation had proven that her systematic approach could work effectively under extreme conditions, building team cohesion that might prove crucial during the more challenging missions ahead. "How are we doing this, Elena?" Williams asked during their brief preparation period. "Honestly, I'm not sure how much longer I can maintain focus at this level." Elena understood his concern. Williams was a strong soldier with excellent training, but he'd never been pushed to operate continuously under this level of stress. The 48-hour mission simulation was designed to identify candidates who could maintain operational effectiveness, even when their bodies and minds were screaming for rest. "One mission at a time," Elena replied, applying the same approach she'd used during the longest surgical procedures of her career. "Don't think about tomorrow or even tonight. Focus only on the next objective, the next decision, the next step forward." She gathered the team around their tactical map, noting the urban environment where they'd be conducting their next operation. The direct action scenario would require different skills than medical evacuation: small unit tactics, building clearance, coordination under fire, areas where her civilian background provided little advantage over her teammates' military experience. "Davidson, this is more your area of expertise than mine," Elena said, recognizing that effective leadership sometimes meant knowing when to delegate primary responsibility to team members with superior specialized knowledge. "I want you to develop the tactical plan for target capture. I'll coordinate overall mission execution and handle any medical issues that arise." Davidson looked surprised by her willingness to share leadership responsibility, but Elena could see approval in his expression. Her approach acknowledged his superior tactical expertise while maintaining overall mission command, a leadership style that utilized team strengths rather than trying to prove individual competence. "Roger that, Doc. I'll need 15 minutes to study the target building and develop approach options." As Davidson worked on tactical planning, Elena used the preparation time to assess her team's physical and mental condition more carefully. Rodriguez was showing signs of dehydration, despite their emphasis on fluid intake. Thompson appeared to be developing muscle cramps that could affect his mobility during building clearance operations. Williams was clearly struggling with the psychological pressure of continuous evaluation, second-guessing decisions that he would have made confidently under normal circumstances. "Rodriguez, I want you to double your water intake over the next 20 minutes, Elena instructed quietly. "Thompson, stretch out those leg muscles and take some electrolyte supplements. Williams, you're performing well. Trust your training and stop overthinking every decision." Elena's medical background allowed her to monitor her team's condition in ways that pure military leaders might miss. She understood the physiological effects of sleep deprivation, stress, and continuous physical exertion, enabling her to make adjustments that could maintain team effectiveness even as individual capabilities declined. "Plan's ready," Davidson announced, spreading the tactical map where the entire team could review his approach. "Two-man entry team, two-man security team, Doc provides overwatch and medical support. Simple, direct, minimum time in the danger area." Elena studied Davidson's plan, noting its strengths and potential weaknesses. The approach was tactically sound and played to their team's individual capabilities, but it also required precise timing and coordination that might be difficult to achieve given their current level of fatigue. "Good plan," Elena agreed. "Let's talk through contingencies in case something goes wrong during execution." The next 10 minutes were spent reviewing alternative courses of action, communication procedures, and emergency protocols that could keep the mission on track even if their primary approach encountered unexpected complications. Elena's systematic approach to contingency planning drew upon the same risk management skills she'd used in surgery, anticipating potential problems and developing solutions before they became critical. "Time," Martinez called out. "Mission execution begins now. Target building is occupied by hostile forces with unknown number of personnel. Capture the high-value target, minimize casualties, extract within 30 minutes. Elena's team moved through the mock urban environment with careful precision. their fatigue-induced slowness compensated by thorough preparation and clear role assignments. Davidson and Jackson composed the entry team, moving through the target building with practiced efficiency. Thompson and Rodriguez provided security, monitoring approaches that could compromise the operation. Elena maintained overwatch from a position that allowed her to coordinate team movements and respond to medical emergencies. The operation proceeded smoothly until Williams, acting as the designated high-value target, attempted to escape through a window that hadn't been covered by their security plan. Thompson, reacting quickly despite his fatigue, intercepted the escape attempt, but sustained a simulated injury during the encounter that would require immediate medical attention. "Man down!" Rodriguez called out over their communication system. "Thompson's hit! Need medical support!" Elena moved quickly from her overwatch position, carrying her medical kit through urban terrain that provided multiple opportunities for enemy observation and fire. This was exactly the kind of scenario where medical personnel became casualties themselves, rushing to help wounded teammates without adequate security or tactical awareness. But Elena's approach was systematic even under pressure. She coordinated with Davidson to establish security for her movement, identified covered positions that would allow her to treat Thompson without exposing herself unnecessarily, and maintained communication with the rest of the team throughout her movement. Simulated GSW to the shoulder, possible arterial involvement, Elena announced after reaching Thompson and beginning her assessment. "I need 5 minutes for stabilization before we can move him." Working on Thompson while maintaining tactical awareness was more challenging than the controlled medical scenario she'd handled earlier. Elena had to divide her attention between medical procedures and security considerations, trusting her teammates to protect her while she focused on life-saving treatment. "Treatment complete, ready for extraction," Elena announced after controlling Thompson's simulated bleeding and immobilizing his wounded shoulder. "Davidson, what's our exit route?" "Same route we came in, but we'll need to move slower with a casualty," Davidson replied. "Can Thompson walk?" Elena looked at Thompson, who was clearly struggling with both his simulated injuries and the cumulative effects of sleep deprivation. In a real scenario, she'd probably recommend litter evacuation, but their mission parameters required rapid extraction without external support. "He can walk with assistance," Elena decided. "Rodriguez, you help Thompson. Davidson and Jackson maintain security. I'll coordinate movement and watch for signs that Thompson needs to stop for additional medical attention." The extraction took 22 minutes, well within their time parameters but slower than Elena would have preferred given the urban environment's vulnerability to enemy action. Thompson performed admirably despite his simulated injuries and obvious exhaustion, maintaining the kind of determination that Elena had come to expect from her teammates. "Mission success," Martinez announced as they reached the designated extraction point. "Excellent tactical execution, effective medical treatment under fire, good team coordination despite obvious fatigue." Elena felt another surge of satisfaction but also growing concern about her team's declining capabilities. They'd successfully completed 2 complex missions, but the cumulative effects of sleep deprivation and continuous stress were becoming more apparent with each operation. "Next mission in 4 hours, Martinez continued. "Use the time for rest, equipment maintenance, and preparation, but understand that the missions will become more challenging as your physical and mental capabilities continue to decline." Elena looked around at her teammates, noting the exhaustion that was becoming more pronounced despite their recent successes. Thompson was favoring his wounded shoulder even though the injury was simulated. Rodriguez appeared to be having difficulty maintaining alertness. Even Davidson was showing signs of the fatigue that would only worsen over the remaining 38 hours of continuous operations. "How do we do this, Elena?" Williams asked quietly, voicing the question that Elena suspected all of them were thinking. "How do we maintain this level of performance when we're already operating on empty?" Elena considered the question carefully, drawing upon every lesson she'd learned during the most challenging periods of her medical career. "We stop trying to maintain the same level of performance. We adapt our approach to match our current capabilities, focus on the fundamentals, and trust each other to compensate for individual weaknesses." She gathered the team around her, noting that even this simple movement required more effort than it would have 12 hours earlier. "From now on, we double-check everything, move more slowly, communicate more frequently, and watch each other for signs of dangerous mistakes. We use the next 4 hours to rest as much as possible, eat regularly, and stay hydrated." Elena looked each of her teammates in the eye, seeing the same combination of determination and apprehension that she felt herself. "Most importantly, We remember that everyone else in this program is dealing with the same challenges we are. The candidates who succeed aren't the ones who don't get tired. They're the ones who can still function effectively when tired becomes their normal state. As her team settled into their rest positions, Elena remained awake for a few additional minutes, reviewing their performance and planning adjustments for the missions ahead. She understood that leadership under these conditions required more than tactical knowledge or medical expertise. It required the ability to help people push beyond limits they thought were absolute. The real test was still ahead of them. Elena's hands shook as she tried to reload her rifle magazine, the simple motor skill that she'd practiced hundreds of times now requiring conscious effort that her exhausted mind could barely provide. 42 hours without sleep had pushed her beyond anything she'd experienced during her medical training, beyond the longest surgeries, beyond the most demanding emergency room shifts. Around her, Team Charlie was in similar condition. Thompson had developed a tremor in his left hand that made precision tasks nearly impossible. Rodriguez kept nodding off during tactical planning sessions, sometimes mid-sentence. Davidson's military bearing had given way to a shuffle that suggested his body was operating on autopilot, while his conscious mind struggled to maintain basic awareness. But they were still operational, still completing missions, still functioning as a team despite individual capabilities that had degraded far below normal standards. Elena's systematic approach to fatigue management was proving effective, compensating for declining physical and mental performance through careful planning, redundant checking, and mutual support. Final mission briefing, Martinez announced, his voice carrying the same crisp authority it had possessed 42 hours earlier. Elena wondered if the instructors operated on rotation schedules that allowed them to maintain alertness while their candidates were pushed to the breaking point. This is your culminating exercise, the mission that will determine whether your team successfully completes SFAS. Elena forced herself to focus on Martinez's words, knowing that inattention during the briefing could result in mission failure and elimination from the program. But maintaining concentration required enormous effort, as if her brain was operating through thick fog that obscured everything except the most essential information. You will conduct a prisoner rescue operation in a high-threat environment, Martinez continued, displaying a tactical map that showed terrain even more challenging than their previous missions. The prisoner is being held in a fortified compound protected by superior numbers of enemy forces. You must infiltrate the compound, locate and extract the prisoner, and evacuate to a safe area, all within a 4-hour time limit. Elena studied the map, noting immediately that this mission would require every skill they'd developed during their training. The compound was located in mountainous terrain that would challenge their physical conditioning. The approach routes offered minimal concealment from enemy observation. The target building was designed to channel attackers into kill zones where they could be easily eliminated. Additionally, Martinez added with what Elena was beginning to recognize as sadistic satisfaction, you will be operating under simulated combat conditions with reduced ammunition, limited medical supplies, and the constraint that any team member who is quote during the operation cannot be replaced or evacuated until mission completion. Elena felt her team's anxiety increase noticeably as the parameters became clear. This wasn't just a test of their tactical capabilities. It was designed to determine whether they could maintain operational effectiveness under the most extreme stress they were likely to encounter in actual Special Forces missions. Team leaders have 15 minutes for planning, Martinez announced. Mission execution begins immediately afterward. Elena gathered her teammates around the tactical map, noting that even this simple movement required coordination that would have been automatic under normal circumstances. Thompson stumbled slightly as he moved to her position. Rodriguez appeared to be having difficulty focusing his eyes on the map details. All right, this is it, Elena said quietly, knowing that her leadership during the next 4 hours would largely determine whether any of them successfully completed SFAS. We've trained for this kind of mission, and we have the skills to succeed. But we need to be smarter about our approach than we would be if we were operating at full capability. She pointed to the compound on the map, tracing potential approach routes with her finger. The direct approaches are obviously kill zones, but look at this terrain feature to the east. That ridgeline offers concealment for most of the approach, and it connects to this drainage that runs within 50 meters of the target building. Davidson leaned over the map, his tactical experience overriding his fatigue as he assessed Elena's suggested approach. That's a longer route, and it involves some technical climbing. Are we in condition for that kind of movement? It was a fair question. The ridgeline approach would require precise navigation and physical capabilities that might be beyond their current condition. But Elena had learned during her medical career that sometimes the safest approach was the one that seemed most difficult initially. The longer route reduces our exposure to enemy fire and gives us multiple escape routes if the mission goes wrong, Elena explained. And technical climbing actually plays to our current condition. It requires careful movement and systematic thinking rather than raw speed or strength. Thompson nodded slowly, his engineer's background helping him visualize the approach despite his exhaustion. Doc's right. The direct routes assume we can fight our way through opposition, but we're not in condition for sustained combat operations. Better to avoid contact until we're actually inside the compound. Quote, Elena felt gratitude for Thompson's support, knowing that team cohesion would be crucial during the challenging hours ahead. She continued her tactical briefing, assigning specific responsibilities based on each team member's remaining capabilities and their overall mission requirements. Rodriguez, you'll handle prisoner extraction once we locate the target. Your medical training gives you the best background for assessing prisoner condition and managing evacuation requirements. Davidson, you'll lead the compound infiltration using your tactical expertise. Thompson, you'll provide overwatch and coordinate our exfiltration. She looked around at her teammates, seeing exhaustion but also determination in their faces. Williams and Jackson, you'll provide security during the extraction and help with prisoner transport if needed. I'll coordinate overall mission execution and handle any medical emergencies that develop. Elena's leadership approach remained systematic despite the extreme conditions, breaking the complex mission into manageable components that could be executed by team members operating at reduced capability. But she also understood that no amount of planning could entirely compensate for the physical and mental degradation they were all experiencing. Questions? Elena asked. What if one of us gets killed during the operation? Williams voiced the concern that Elena suspected all of them were thinking. How does that affect mission execution? Elena had been considering the same question. Losing team members during the operation would require rapid reorganization of responsibilities and potentially fundamental changes to their tactical approach. But discussing worst-case scenarios in detail might undermine team confidence when morale was already fragile due to extreme fatigue. We adapt and continue the mission, Elena replied simply, same as we've been doing for the past 42 hours. We use our training, trust each other, and focus on the immediate objective. It wasn't a comprehensive answer, but Elena knew that detailed contingency planning was less important than maintaining team unity and determination. Her teammates needed to believe that success was possible, even under the most challenging conditions they'd ever faced. Time, Martinez called out. Mission execution begins now. Quote, Elena's team moved out from their planning position, beginning the approach to their target with the careful deliberation that had characterized their operations throughout the 48-hour exercise. But Elena could feel the difference in their movement. Slower reflexes, less precise coordination, the kind of subtle degradation that could prove catastrophic during complex tactical operations. The initial approach proceeded according to plan. Elena's chosen route along the ridgeline provided concealment from enemy observation while allowing the team to maintain visual contact with their target. The technical climbing was manageable despite their fatigue, requiring careful movement but not extreme physical exertion. But as they neared the compound, Elena began to notice signs that their exhaustion was affecting judgment in ways that could compromise mission success. Thompson missed obvious terrain features that would have been apparent under normal circumstances. Rodriguez made navigation errors that Elena had to correct quietly. Even Davidson's tactical assessments seemed less thorough than his usual standard. Hold position, Elena whispered, as they reached the final covered position before beginning their infiltration of the compound. I want everyone to take 60 seconds to assess their individual condition, and let me know if you're not capable of continuing the mission. It was a risk. Giving team members permission to acknowledge their limitations might result in multiple people deciding they couldn't continue. But Elena's medical experience had taught her that unacknowledged fatigue and stress often led to catastrophic mistakes during critical moments. I'm good to go, Davidson reported quietly. Tired, but operational. Same here, Thompson agreed. Not at full capability, but I can handle my assigned responsibilities. Elena received similar reports from the rest of her team, each person acknowledging their fatigue while affirming their readiness to continue the mission. She felt a surge of pride in their determination, understanding that their willingness to push beyond their comfort zones was exactly the quality that Special Forces training was designed to identify. Roger. Remember, slow and deliberate movement, double-check everything, watch each other's backs. Elena looked each team member in the eye, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether their 48 hours of suffering had been worthwhile. Let's go get our prisoner. The infiltration of the compound was the most challenging tactical operation Elena had ever participated in. Moving through enemy-controlled territory while maintaining stealth required a level of coordination and precision that pushed their degraded capabilities to the absolute limit. But Elena's systematic approach to leadership proved effective even under these extreme conditions. By breaking the complex infiltration into discrete steps, assigning clear responsibilities to each team member, and maintaining communication throughout the operation, she was able to coordinate team movement despite the individual performance degradation that affected all of them. Target building 50 meters, Davidson whispered over their communication system. I can see 2 guards at the main entrance. Unknown number of additional personnel inside. Elena studied the building through her binoculars, noting the tactical challenges that would affect their prisoner extraction. Multiple entrances meant numerous potential escape routes for enemy forces, but also multiple points of vulnerability that they'd need to monitor simultaneously. The building's construction appeared substantial enough to provide cover from small arms fire, but also complicated enough to make rapid movement difficult. Rodriguez, can you identify the most likely location for prisoner detention? Elena asked quietly. Rodriguez examined the building layout, applying his knowledge of standard detention procedures to the tactical problem. Probably the ground floor, away from primary entrances but accessible for guard rotation. Most likely that room on the north side with limited windows. Elena nodded, incorporating Rodriguez's assessment into her developing plan for compound infiltration. Davidson, what's our best approach for neutralizing guards and gaining entry? 2-man entry team through the rear door. 2-man security team covering primary escape routes. Overwatch element providing early warning for enemy reinforcements, Davidson replied, his tactical experience overriding his fatigue as he focused on the immediate problem. Elena made rapid calculations based on their team's current capabilities and the mission's time constraints. The approach Davidson suggested was tactically sound but required precise timing and coordination that might be difficult to achieve given their condition. Modified plan, Elena decided. Single entry team, Davidson and Jackson. Thompson and Rodriguez provide security. Williams maintains overwatch. I coordinate movement and prepare for prisoner medical assessment. Elena's modification reduced the coordination requirements while maintaining tactical effectiveness, acknowledging their reduced capabilities while preserving mission viability. It was the kind of leadership decision that balanced idealized tactical doctrine against realistic assessment of available resources. Execute in 60 seconds, Elena whispered, beginning the final countdown to what would either be their greatest success or their elimination from the Special Forces program. As Davidson and Jackson moved toward their entry position, Elena felt the familiar calm that descended during the most critical moments of complex surgical procedures. Everything they'd trained for, everything they'd endured during the past 48 hours, had led to this moment when success or failure would be determined by their ability to function effectively, despite physical and mental exhaustion that pushed them beyond their perceived limits. The mission was about to begin. Elena watched through her binoculars as Davidson and Jackson approached the rear entrance of the target building, their movement careful and deliberate, despite the obvious fatigue that affected every step. 47 hours without sleep had pushed both men beyond anything they'd experienced in their military careers, but their tactical discipline remained intact. Entry team in position, Davidson's voice crackled through their communication system, barely audible over the simulated ambient noise that added another layer of stress to the operation. Elena scanned the compound perimeter, noting the positions of enemy role-players who were positioned to respond to their infiltration attempt. The instructors had created a realistic scenario that would challenge every aspect of their training, but Elena also understood that the exercise was designed to be winnable if they could maintain tactical discipline despite their exhausted condition. Security team's report, Elena whispered into her radio. Thompson in position, covering the eastern approach, came the immediate response. Rodriguez covering western approach, no movement observed, followed seconds later. Elena checked her watch, noting that they were operating within their planned timeline despite the careful movement required by their current capabilities. The systematic approach to mission planning was proving effective, compensating for individual performance degradation through thorough preparation and clear role assignments. Williams, Overwatch report. No external movement, but I can see activity inside the target building. Looks like normal patrol patterns. Elena processed the information quickly, understanding that enemy activity patterns would provide crucial intelligence for timing their entry and extraction. The guards' routine movements might create windows of opportunity that would allow her team to complete their mission without extensive combat operations that their current condition might not support. Davidson, execute entry on my mark, Elena commanded, calculating the optimal moment based on guard movement patterns that Williams was observing. Mark! The next 30 seconds unfolded with the kind of controlled chaos that characterized all tactical operations. Elena could hear Davidson and Jackson moving through the building, their progress marked by brief radio transmissions and the sound of doors opening and closing as they searched for their prisoner. Contact! Jackson's voice carried excitement and tension. The prisoner is located, appears to be in good condition. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction, but also awareness that locating the prisoner was only the beginning of their extraction challenges. Getting out of the compound while protecting a potentially injured person would test their capabilities even more severely than the infiltration had. Rodriguez, prepare for prisoner assessment, Elena commanded. Thompson, report any changes in enemy activity patterns. Movement on the eastern perimeter, Thompson reported immediately. Looks like guards responding to something. They may have detected our entry. Elena's tactical assessment shifted immediately. If enemy forces were responding to their presence, the window for clean extraction was closing rapidly. They'd need to modify their approach to account for increased opposition while maintaining protection for their rescued prisoner. Davidson, what's the prisoner's condition? Elena asked. Conscious, able to walk with assistance, appears to have some injuries that might require medical attention, Davidson replied, his transmission punctuated by sounds of movement and preparation for extraction. Elena made rapid calculations based on prisoner condition, enemy response, and her team's remaining capabilities. The original extraction plan had assumed a relatively clean withdrawal with minimal opposition. Now they'd need to adapt to changing conditions while operating under extreme fatigue that made complex decision-making increasingly difficult. Modified extraction plan, Elena announced over their communication system. Thompson and Rodriguez converge on the target building to provide additional security for prisoner movement. Williams. Maintain overwatch, but be prepared to provide covering fire if we encounter opposition during extraction. The plan modification required rapid coordination between team members who were operating at significantly reduced capability, but Elena's systematic approach to leadership had built enough team cohesion to make the adjustment manageable. Each person understood their role and could execute their responsibilities despite the challenging conditions. Moving to target building, Thompson reported, his voice carrying the strain of rapid movement after 47 hours of continuous operations. Elena could see Thompson's movement through her observation position, noting that his pace was slower than it would have been under normal circumstances but still adequate for their mission requirements. Rodriguez was also moving toward the building, approaching from a different angle that would provide security coverage for multiple exit routes. Enemy activity increasing, Williams reported from his overwatch position, multiple personnel moving toward the compound from external positions. Elena understood that their window for extraction was becoming smaller with each minute that passed. The enemy response was designed to create time pressure that would force teams to make tactical decisions under stress, exactly the kind of scenario they'd encounter in actual Special Forces operations. Davidson, ready for extraction? Prisoner secured, ready to move on your command, Davidson replied. Elena reviewed their tactical situation quickly, noting that they had team members positioned to provide security, a prisoner ready for evacuation, and enemy forces responding to their presence but not yet in position to prevent their escape. The timing was crucial. Too early, and they'd move before their security was properly established. Too late, and they'd encounter organized opposition that could compromise the entire mission. Execute extraction all teams, Elena commanded. Move to Rally Point Alpha, maintain communication, watch for enemy contact. What followed was the longest 10 minutes of Elena's life. Her team moved through the compound with their rescued prisoner, providing mutual support and security, while navigating terrain that offered multiple opportunities for enemy ambush. Elena coordinated their movement from her command position, making tactical adjustments as conditions changed and new information became available. Contact left, Rodriguez's voice carried the tension of engagement, followed by the sound of simulated weapons fire that indicated their worst-case scenario was developing. Elena could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions around the compound, suggesting that enemy forces had successfully positioned themselves to interdict the extraction. Her team would need to fight their way out while protecting a prisoner who might not be able to move quickly or effectively. "Thompson, can you provide flanking fire on those positions?" Elena asked, her tactical training taking over despite exhaustion that made every decision feel like it was being made through thick fog. "Roger, maneuvering for a better position," Thompson replied. Elena watched as Thompson moved through terrain that provided limited cover, his approach hampered by fatigue but guided by tactical expertise that remained intact despite 47 hours of continuous stress. The young engineer had developed into an effective combat soldier during their training, proving that determination could compensate for lack of extensive military experience. "Davidson, prisoner status?" "Mobile but slow, possible leg injury that's affecting movement," Davidson reported while continuing to coordinate the extraction under fire. Elena made another rapid assessment of their tactical situation. The prisoner's injury would slow their movement and make them more vulnerable to enemy fire, but abandoning the rescue would result in mission failure and elimination from the program. They'd have to find ways to protect their rescued asset while maintaining movement towards safety. "Rodriguez, can you assist with prisoner movement while Thompson provides covering fire?" Elena asked. "Roger, moving to assist Davidson," Rodriguez replied immediately. Elena felt pride in her team's responses. Despite the extreme conditions they were all operating under, each person was pushing beyond their individual limitations to support the overall mission, demonstrating exactly the kind of teamwork and determination that Special Forces training was designed to identify. "Williams, what's the situation from Overwatch?" "Enemy forces are repositioning to cut off your primary escape route," Williams reported, "but there's an alternate route through that drainage we identified during planning. It's longer, but appears to be undefended." Elena had to make a decision that would determine mission success or failure. The primary escape route was shorter and more direct, but enemy opposition might prove too strong for her exhausted team to overcome. The alternate route would take longer and require more physical exertion, but offered better odds of successful extraction. "All teams alternate extraction routes through the drainage system," Elena commanded. "Williams, maintain Overwatch and coordinate our movement. Everyone else, bound by teams toward Rally Point Bravo." The movement through the drainage system tested every aspect of Elena's team's remaining capabilities. The terrain was challenging, requiring careful navigation through obstacles while maintaining protection for their prisoners. Enemy forces continued to pursue, creating pressure that made rapid decision-making essential despite cognitive impairment from extreme fatigue. But Elena's systematic approach to leadership proved effective even under these conditions. By maintaining clear communication, providing tactical guidance when needed, and trusting her team members to execute their individual responsibilities, she was able to coordinate successful extraction despite challenges that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. "Rally Point Bravo in sight," Thompson reported as they neared their designated extraction area. "No enemy contact observed." Elena felt an overwhelming sense of relief as her team reached safety with their rescued prisoner intact. They'd successfully completed the most challenging mission of their training, demonstrating that they could function effectively as a team despite physical and mental conditions that pushed them far beyond their normal capabilities. "Mission complete," Martinez announced as Elena's team crossed into the safe area with their prisoner. "Outstanding tactical execution under extremely challenging conditions." Quote, Elena collapsed next to a tree, her body finally acknowledging the 48 hours of continuous stress and physical exertion. Around her, her teammates were in similar condition, exhausted beyond anything they'd previously experienced, but also triumphant in a way that would be difficult to replicate in civilian life. "How do you feel, Doc?" Thompson asked, his voice carrying exhaustion but also satisfaction. Elena considered the question carefully, taking inventory of her physical and mental condition after the most challenging 2 days of her life. Her body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible. Her mind felt foggy and slow. But she also felt more alive and capable than she had in years. "I feel like we just proved something important about ourselves," Elena replied. "All of us." Martinez approached their position, carrying evaluation forms that would determine whether Elena's team had successfully completed SFAS. Elena watched his face for any indication of their performance assessment, but the instructor's expression remained professionally neutral. Dr. Vasquez, effective leadership throughout the 48-hour exercise, Martinez said formally. Your team completed all assigned missions despite operating under conditions designed to eliminate most candidates. Elena nodded, understanding that Martinez's words represented the culmination of months of preparation and weeks of intensive training, but she also understood that SFAS was only the beginning of her Special Forces journey. What's next, Sergeant? Martinez smiled with what Elena recognized as genuine approval. Next, Doc, you get some sleep. Then you begin the Special Forces qualification course, where the real training starts. Elena looked around at her teammates, all of whom had successfully completed SFAS despite being told repeatedly that the odds were against them. They'd proven that age, background, and physical limitations could be overcome through determination, teamwork, and systematic preparation. But as Elena settled into her first opportunity for real rest in 48 hours, she understood that earning the right to continue training was just the first step in a journey that would continue to test her limits in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The hardest part was still ahead. The helicopter's rotors beat a rhythm that Elena felt in her chest as they approached the landing zone outside Forward Operating Base Shank in Afghanistan's Logar province. Through the aircraft's window, she could see the barren landscape that had become the backdrop for America's longest war. Brown hills dotted with compounds that could hide enemy fighters, roads that might conceal improvised explosive devices. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.